See to make sure. Let me know when we are live. Let's see here. I believe we are live right now. Hello, everyone. And I just want to make sure that, yes, we are live. So, hi, everyone. My name is Anna Bierstam. I am the wellness pioneer of Six Senses. Incredibly happy to be here today, this beautiful Sunday in June. And I am here with Claire Bidwell Smith. And I'm really, really honored. She is an author and a grief therapist and has written 3 books. And what's interesting with Claire is it's about grief, it's about anxiety. By the time she was 25, you'd lost both your mother and your father to cancer, and you were an only child. And basically, with your diagnosis, treatments, and then death, it really was a big burden for you to carry. And you felt very alone, which many of us do, and consumed with anxiety and depression. And then you really experienced grief, anxiety, and seeing that what you have experienced was normal, and that these devastating losses helped you to dedicate your life to understand the loss and grief and effort to help others, what you certainly do today. You write books, you lead meditation, you do coaching, and so many other things. So tell us a bit about how that has shaped you in the past and now.
It's been quite a journey. As you said, both of my parents died when I was young, and it really shaped everything that I know about myself, about the world. I had to go through some dark times before I got into a better place. And when I did, it was through things like yoga and meditation that really, truly helped me, therapy. I decided to go back and get my master's in clinical psychology and become a therapist and help other people go through their experiences of grief and loss. And I worked in hospice for a long time, and then in private practice in Los Angeles. And along the way, I've written these 3 books. And it's been really interesting to be in this current environment that we're going through right now with the pandemic, because I think so many people are experiencing grief and anxiety in new ways that they didn't anticipate or hadn't thought about before. So I feel like all these years of work and thinking about grief and anxiety and loss has suddenly, like, I've had to really kind of step into this new space with it and support just different ways of it now.
And it's, if I may start with a bit of a personal reflection that I actually just thought about, because my father died about a year and a half ago, and my mother 2 weeks ago, a bit unexpectedly. And and it's just going through grief, and it's been a lot this last 1.5 years, 1.5, losing both parents in such a short time period. And my father was a bit prepared for, my mother now was a bit less prepared for. And it was interesting is that what is the best way when you experience, because I'm not alone with this, there's a lot of people right now around the world experiencing grief. What is the best way to kind of tackle when you have something like this coming up quite suddenly?
Yeah, I think, grief is just, it's so different for everyone. And every grief that you experience is different. Your relationship with your mother, your relationship with your father, different, the way that they died, the unexpectedness of your mother, just different things fuel the grief process in different ways. And then our own innate personalities have an impact on how we process loss. So, there is no right way to grieve. There's no particular formula for it. There's no way that's kind of universal. There are universal traits and aspects of it. I would say the main thing to do is to really let yourself feel it, find support, let yourself go through it. I think we can be very hard on ourselves when we're grieving. It's such a vulnerable emotion, a vulnerable state. So many people who come sit in my office, the first thing they'll say is, I think I'm doing this wrong. But there's no right way to do it, and people often underestimate the length of time that grief lasts. And so people will think that they should be through it much sooner than they are. Sometimes we have delayed grief, you don't feel it right away, or you can't process it, or you just can't let it in some way or another. And maybe it's 6 months or a year or 2 years later that it really hits you, and you're asked to move through it in some way. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at grief and to move through it. And the main thing is to just let it unfold as it kind of wants to.
I think I read in a book review or something with you, Rick, is that in other societies, sometimes when you had someone close to die, you get like 6 months off or something. And here in our Western society, which not everyone that's viewing us is from, but it's more about you just rebound, you just continue with life as is normal, and you might not have time or feel that you have time because you have kids and you have all kinds of other things and work and other chores to do. So you don't feel that you have the time. So I would suspect that actually taking some time and being quiet and understand, kind of being through the emotions that's going through instead of trying to work yourself through it is would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not always easy. I think people will kind of feel like they open that door to grief and it looks so overwhelming, or they're afraid that they'll start crying and not be able to stop, or so they could just close the door again. And I know for some people it can be really helpful to almost schedule a time. We are very busy, some of us, careers or families or whatever's going on, and it can be difficult to let ourselves grieve because again, we think we'll be incapacitated if we let it open. But so maybe just picking some time, setting aside some actual time, like on Saturday, I'm going to take a few hours to myself. I'm going to walk, in the woods, or I'm going to sit and look through some photos or listen to some music and just kind of create that space, because otherwise it sometimes doesn't unfold naturally given that our hectic lives.
That is such a good advice. And I have to, I mean, to be vulnerable myself, I often try to not think about it when with others because I don't want to start crying. And then you feel like, okay, then you kind of like damp the whole energy in the room. So you really, and people get uncomfortable. So it's really, you kind of put this facade. But I think that was an excellent idea. Now you've written your latest book, it's about also anxiety. And I think anxiety is something that we're going through in so many ways and so many levels around the world right now, and how that is related to grief. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think anxiety is a component of grief that's often underlooked or overlooked. And it's something I started seeing in all of my clients, and something I was experiencing myself. Just the feeling of anxiety after you go through a significant loss. You lose a parent, a spouse, a child. And I think what comes with that is just this really big reminder that nothing is quite certain, that our lives, we cannot plan them out perfectly, we're not quite in control of everything, and that feeling creates a lot of anxiety. It's not dissimilar to, I think, kind of what we've gone through globally in recent months, of just kind of a big shift and waking up every day to uncertainty. That kind of feeling of waking up every day and not being sure what's going to happen, how long this is going to last, how it will play out, feeling very little control over it. And so I think that that's a similar feeling when we go through loss. Um, I think loss asks a lot of us. Grief asks a lot of us. And I'm sure that you're familiar with this right now. I think it really asks us to look at ourselves, what we're doing with our lives, what's meaningful to us, our relationships, how we are, who we are. And sometimes that can be anxiety provoking. It can be so useful and meaningful, but it can be very demanding in this way that can be overwhelming. Does that make sense?
Does, but and I've read somewhere that anxiety, there's no need to be anxious because there's no point because you never know what's going to happen. But at the same time, we are anxious. You can't really run away from it. So sometimes it's that toss. It's like also worry. I often there is this saying that worry is pointless. It might happen or it might not happen. So why worry? But it's the same with it being anxious. But at the same time, there's no way no one on earth, I mean, I think every person on earth right now is anxious about the future. So it's very difficult to run away from. How do you advise your clients to relate to worry and anxiousness?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is no point, but that's beside the point. I don't think it's always up to us. Sometimes anxiety, you just wake up and you're anxious, whether or not there's a point to it. Um, and I think, you know, anxiety is a useful tool most of the time. It helps us stay prepared for things, get ready for things, remember to be on alert about things, but it can get away from us when it gets too big and when it's in response to something like a loss or what's going on in the world right now. And the single most useful tool that I know of for anxiety is meditation, because anxiety is really about our thoughts, right? We wake up in the morning, We are looking at our phones before we're even out of bed. We're downloading so much information in just a few minutes' time. And it causes all these different thoughts and anxious responses when we see certain headlines or see certain things on social media. Um, and so, one of the ways to really balance that or counteract it is meditation. Just getting clear, getting present, finding space between your thoughts, recognizing that some thoughts are not helpful, not attaching to them, letting them kind of drift off. So, meditation is what I always work with my clients.
Yeah, and you're going to take us through a little practice at the end. I think that we've agreed and we talked about. And so I just want to say for everyone that's listening, I know that we have people from the US, from Asia, from Europe. So really warm welcome. If you have any questions, please let us know. I know that you're in the US, and actually it's touching all around the world. It's a very special situation about that everyone is as important as everyone else, so to speak. And that is a grief, it's anxiousness, it's all of those things. And how do you work with tackling the situation that you and many others and all of us actually are in right now?
It is. It's very the last 2 weeks with the death of George Floyd and just kind of the illumination of so much that is not working in our country, and it's been overwhelming for everyone. I think it's been um, important, and I think it will hopefully lead to change. Although there are many times that we seem to find ourselves in this place and then find ourselves back here, so it can be frustrating too. And I think a lot of this is very real grief. I think we're grieving for years of problems and racism and police brutality. This has been something that's been going on for a long time. So there's a lot of grief that I think people are feeling, a lot of anger that I think people are feeling. Um, I think that what's happening right now, all the protests, while they seem to be moving into a peaceful place, that's been a really good thing. And I think it's important. I think we have to. I think we have to change. Change is not always comfortable, and it's not easy. But I think that hopefully this will lead to more change, continued change. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you today is also how do we become part of the solution, whether it's mothers or racism or whatever it is, the coronavirus and or anything else, losing a job or whatever. How do we actually become part of the solution instead of watching from the side, so to speak, inside ourselves?
I think talking about it, as much as we can, I think is really important. I think a lot of these topics are really difficult to talk about, whether it's racism or grief or end of life or anxiety. People don't want to talk about them because they're uncomfortable, they're tricky. But I think continuing to talk about them is really important. I think being really curious is like, it's one of my favorite words in general, but especially right now is being curious, not assuming we know what other people's experiences are, not assuming we know what the right thing to do is, being curious instead, being curious about other people's experiences, being curious about different options of ways we can change, things we can build and grow. I think that sometimes we just think we know things we don't, and especially we assume that about other people all the time. I see it in grief a lot. A lot of people will come to me when they're grieving and they say that they're feeling a lot of pressure from people around them to be a certain way in their grief. And this is where I wish that outsiders would be more curious about someone's grief process, or white people could be more curious about Black people's experiences. Just this curiosity that we need to have for each other, and that I think comes with an empathic level of understanding.
I think the curiosity part is it's in the last year it's been curiosity has come up as a word so in so many ways. And we're at in Singapore at the end of last year before all this happened, and at a talk about how older people above whatever is 60, 70 are now how you kind of like going into two ways. You get old or you stay curious. It was almost, it's also about curious is about a young mindset. It's also, I listened to a talk the other day, but that the most important thing for the future is unlearning. So you kind of unlearn everything that you've learned because you have no idea what the future will hold. So I think in general, I almost want to make 2020 to the word of curiosity, because it seems like curiosity keeps you young, it keeps you open, it keeps you understanding. And especially, I think it is important that people stay curious and voice their curiosity in grief and anxiety, because so often people are not feeling comfortable and therefore they try to stay away of actually saying anything. So I think that's a hugely good advice. I don't know, have you looked at curiosity in another other way lately?
I think we have to be afraid to say the wrong thing. I think we have to be okay saying the wrong thing. I think that that's what happens a lot, and that's why we're not curious enough, that we're so afraid to say the wrong thing that we don't say anything at all. But I think that we should be like, let it be okay to mess up. Let it be okay to like say the wrong thing, or to say, I don't know what to say. I hear this with grief a lot too. To keep bringing it back, it's just this area that I know and understand and think about so much. But often when someone is grieving, the people around them won't say anything, or they won't address it because they're afraid to say the wrong thing. And I think just being curious and showing up for your person and saying, I know you're hurting right now. I'm not even sure what to say. I want to listen. I'm here.
I think that is so important. And I read in your latest book, it's something about um, when you have a big loss, that could also release a huge love. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that loss is like a mirror of love in our relationships. So I think that again, it kind of illuminates so many things, and it asks us to really think about what's important in our lives. And I think that I don't know, I see a lot of transformation come from loss. I see a lot of this kind of breakdown that's very uncomfortable, where we're kind of forced to take a hard look at things and maybe move through some uncomfortable spaces, but then rebuild or continue to grow in really amazing ways. So most people I know who have gone through a big loss, after a period of time, maybe even years, they come out of it more compassionate, more empathic, having richer, deeper relationships, the
Mhm.
ability to just kind of love on different levels. So I think that is something to think about and remember when we're going through grief.
So sometimes when you're going through grief, it's difficult to access love because you can have anger or feeling of resentment or unfairness and all those things. How do you actually access the love and compassion and kindness inside of you?
I think you're right. You have to kind of move through those other layers first. So you kind of have to move through anger or guilt or resentment. It's very common when we lose someone that we have a response sometimes of anger, where we can hold on to that or get stuck in it. Anger is a very powerful emotion, and it's kind of one that a lot of grieving people will stay in rather than let themselves feel the sadness, because the sadness can be so vulnerable, so overwhelming. And then guilt and I think guilt and regret are common after losing someone we love, especially if it's something unexpected. We may not have had time to say goodbye. We may not have finished conversations. We may not have told someone we loved them one last time, even though they may have known. There's still some of those lingering feelings. And I think until we work through the guilt, anger, regret, only then can we kind of return to a different place of being able to just feel that pure love. But I think self-compassion is a big part of this too. Again, I think we can be so hard on ourselves, and really just having compassion for yourself as a human being going through a really big experience is important.
No, I think especially now I hear so often with friends and loved ones who have had family or parents pass or whoever it would have been, is that they feel guilty about not being there at the time of death or not being there enough. And that's something that kind of weighs upon it. I don't think, I mean, almost everyone I talk to have that guilt when someone passes. How do you work with that? How do you overcome that?
I think there's a few different ways. Sometimes what I see is that we hold on to guilt as a way of holding on to our person. I see it very often that I'll have a client who's grieving, and they really feel afraid that if they stop feeling guilty and stop kind of thinking about what they could have done differently or should have done better, it means that they're over their person. It means they feel like they're like, if I let go of this and I absolve myself from feeling guilty and I move forward in my life, then they feel like they're moving on from their person and letting go of them. So what I do with them is to try to help them find a new way to hold on to their person rather than guilt, finding new ways to internalize their loved one, bring them into their life, honor them in some way that doesn't have anything to do with their guilt. I think it's really important for us to develop connections and relationships with our loved ones, even after they're gone. Our relationship isn't over. Our love for them isn't done. So we have to find ways to internalize them in healthy ways. And I think that letting go of that guilt and regret and finding new ways to hold on to them is really important.
And one thing that I found is that forgiveness and forgiveness of oneself is a very important part of grief. Have you seen that too?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people are really hard on themselves. And so doing these kind of self-compassion exercises where they kind of forgive themselves for whatever it is they did or didn't do or would like to do differently is really a big part of it. It's amazing to me how hard we can be on ourselves in general as humans.
I think I read somewhere that we are nicer to our dogs generally or our pets than we are to ourselves. We take better care of them than ourselves, and we can be very hard on ourselves. And I think it's that society. Hopefully, what I've heard also from people being locked down, when I've spoken to people, it's been about looking at. I don't want to work this hard. I don't want to be this hard on myself. I want to enjoy life more. I want to be with people who I care for more and not be, because I think that we in the society has gone through it being very hard. We have to go forward. We have to prove ourselves. We have to be successful. And somehow I hope, my hope is that through this pandemic and everything else that we're going through right now, that we will come out of it and feeling a bit more compassion, not only to others, but also to ourselves, and not be so hard. I think that's one of our biggest problem right now in the Western world, at least.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. And I hope that we do come out of it being a little kinder to ourselves. I think it's going to be interesting to have come through a true global experience, something that we are all going through together. And while there are many differences in how different places are handling it, we're all still experiencing the same situation, which is kind of amazing in some ways. One thing I always think about grief a lot is that it can be very lonely and isolating because you're going through grief, but the whole world is kind of continuing on around you. In this case, we're kind of all going through it, which is so beautiful, and I hope can give us a new level of compassion and empathy for ourselves and for the world.
And we've talked a little bit about before on these talks, and I've had some talks about how do you step out of fear to love or creativity. It's really about accepting and the situation and forgiving.
Mhm. Let's see, you just froze for me.
Long, difficult process to go through anger and all these things that we're going through. Is there ways to do a shortcut?
That would be nice. Shortcuts are always good when you're going through hard stuff. I think the only shortcut to this is to be really present to it. I think when we hide from it, when we try to push away these feelings or questions or experiences, when we try to not let ourselves feel vulnerable or feel grief, that is when it spills out in all the wrong places, in anxiety, in anger, in relationship problems. When we let ourselves really feel everything that we're being asked to feel, I think we do move through it in a more fluid way. We do move through it faster, when we block it and we try not to let ourselves feel it. That's when it gets very complicated and spills out again in unfortunate ways. So the only shortcut I know of is to actually really step into it and be present to it.
I have to agree. I mean, I've read a lot about when you're in a bad mood. I mean, I'm not as educated as you are, but I'm interested in everything that you're doing, and that if you try to kind of fight bad mood with positive thinking, you always lose. You just have to accept that you're actually in a bad mood and just kind of see where it is and sit with it, and then it passes quicker. And I have to say that has always worked for me since then when I really understood that.
Well, I think a bad mood is asking something of you. You're in a bad mood because something is happening, something is bothering you, something's hurting you, something's scaring you, something isn't working. So I think to just try to put a positive spin on it isn't going to address the issue. But letting yourself sit in that bad mood and feel all that it's asking you to feel will help you move through it.
Thank you. So I know we were going to go through, and I'm so excited to go through an exercise on not a shortcut, but at least a way to help you to sit through it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I just
so
want to do a brief meditation, guys. So for anyone listening, everyone listening, and for you, Anna, just to close your eyes, put both feet on the floor, start to breathe in slowly, in through your nose, out through your nose. Just kind of notice your breath. I think so often we don't let ourselves even notice that we're breathing. So really notice your breath, the feeling against your nostrils. Kind of feel your surroundings, the chair, the floor beneath you, how supported you are. Notice your body, everything that you're feeling in your body. If you're warm or cold or hungry or thirsty, the taste in your mouth. Just getting very present, coming to the present moment. We spend a lot of time thinking about the future and a lot of time thinking about the past, but this present moment is all that exists. And just noticing any thoughts that come. You don't have to necessarily get rid of them, but don't attach to them. Just kind of notice them. Keep breathing. Now I want you to kind of imagine that you can see yourself as if you were up above, floating and looking down at yourself. And I want you to look at yourself with tenderness for just a moment and have this compassion for yourself as this human being in the world today, June 7th, Sunday. This is you in this very moment. And just see yourself with compassion. And I want you to take a moment to forgive yourself for anything you feel you need to be forgiven for. Whether it's something in the past, whether it's something now, just take a moment and forgive yourself. And just take some deep breaths and let yourself be the very human being that you are in the world. And feel love for the world around you and all the other people that are going through all their very own human experiences. Just take one more breath and start to blink open your eyes and come back to the room.
Wow, thank you. Was truly powerful. I will go much deeper into that one in my morning meditation, I think.
Yeah.
Because it came up some things where actually what came to me, not being personal again today, is that I'm working, like, give yourself some slack. You're working so hard. You're pushing yourself, and there's so much that you feel that you should do. But just kind of relax and be in the moment and enjoy it. It's meant, your time on earth is really meant to enjoyment and celebration and not just pushing. So that was interesting. And I haven't kind of got that like that before. So that was truly powerful.
I'm so glad.
So
I'm so glad for the work you're doing. Even if you're working too much, I'm grateful to you for doing this work, for creating these spaces for people to talk about these things and feel it. And it's so important.
Yeah. For everyone who's listening now, or also who will listen to this afterwards, we'll put comments so you can go and get in touch with Claire and also get access. There are some, her books, of course, but also some really good meditations and other things on Claire's website. And it's been really inspiring. I've learned that we have to sit through and accept where we're at and sit through all the judgment and the fear and the anger and whatever comes up, but also I think one of the most important things is the power of curiosity in so many ways. And I think for us right now to get through pandemics or demonstrations or situations or racism, whatever it is, or lost job or lost mothers and fathers, it's being curious. I think actually curiosity can heal together with compassion, kindness, and love. So Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I hope that everyone that has listened also feel that they have got something. If you have any questions, please post them afterwards, and I will make sure to answer them or send them forward to Claire to answer them as well. So thank you everyone for listening. And thank you so much, Claire, for being part of this today. Really appreciate it. So thank you. Have a beautiful Sunday, the 7th of June. Right. Bye. Have a good day.